I'm a practitioner, like Craig said. We've got practices in Minnesota and in Iowa. We spent the heart and soul of our time rumbling around the Midwest, and I kind of like to think if there's pigs there, we've either been there or hopefully we'll get there someday. I didn't come to this naturally. I got sucked into this because of my client needs and because of some association duties. Be that as it may, really I wanted to give a talk on how to manage the extraneous profits due to cyclical uptick in the market, but that didn't work out very good. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about antibiotic use, regulation, and record keeping. Can I do that? Very good. You know, I have this mental image of Fleming sitting around, Alexander Fleming sitting around. Interesting chap. I believe it was 28, 29, somewhere in there. And he'd been on vacation with his family for a month. And the good Dr. Fleming wasn't known for keeping a very organized, uncluttered lab. And he gets back after a month of vacation and starts going through stuff and cleaning up a little bit and finds a stack of plates on his desk that, you know, he'd previously plated staphylococcal organisms. Well, as it happens, due to his month away, he noticed some mold growing on those plates, right? Well, being a good scientist, he also observes that there's no staphylococcus growing around the mold. Well, of course, the mold was penicillium, and that gave rise to penicillin, and the world hasn't been the same ever since. Now, I don't know that Dr. Fleming really knew what he had discovered at the time. I don't have any doubts that he knew he'd made a significant scientific discovery, but it was only the events of the next 2 or 3 decades that really defined how profound that discovery was. And it was profound not only for us. I mean, as practitioners, think of dealing with a hot hemolytic E. coli outbreak or a hot Actinobacillus pneumoniae outbreak without antibiotics. You know, they are a fundamental tool that we use day in, day out. Humans are no different. In human medicine, would we read the volumes of text in history today about bubonic plague if at that time antibiotics had existed? I doubt it. That chapter would be somewhat thinner than it is today. And I think that gives rise, how important it is to both groups give rise to the debate we have today. As a representative of the livestock industry, it's obvious to all of us that we use a lot of antibiotics. That makes us a big target. And Scott Hurd, this problem isn't, or this debate doesn't originate as simply as one might think. It's not as simple as antibiotic use in animals gives rise to resistant strains of bacteria that cause disease in humans. Scott Hurd is eyebrow deep in this debate. He's a former USDA Undersecretary for Food Safety, I believe. Currently a professor at Iowa State. Does a wonderful job for our industry in regard to espousing or in regard to forming our side of the debate. And as he lines out the steps necessary to get to the problem, first of all, antibiotics are used in animals. That results in the development of resistant bacteria. That resistant bacteria remains on meat through the packing process, through the transport process, and ultimately to the retailer. Consumer buys the meat. The resistant bacteria remains viable through preparation, usually through cross-contamination in a kitchen. That resistant bacteria is transmitted to humans. Human becomes infected. Human goes to the doctor and is prescribed an antimicrobial, but the human does not recover. So that's what we see on the internet, that's what we see on the news, and that's what causes us a great deal of angst. And where that really becomes a problem is how it manifests. You know, there's all kinds of groups with all kinds of specific agendas. They're fun to read about. Sometimes they raise my blood pressure a little bit. But where that becomes important to us is through all the areas that Liz talked about. And I'm going to try not to be overly redundant. I'm going to kind of try and discuss the producer side of at least the guidance for industries. PAMTA, as she mentioned, I believe is not moving forward. That's a good thing. But the guidance for industry, and Liz mentioned that guidance I find a little offensive because it in essence is a functional law. But where it becomes important to practitioners is the loss of growth promotion claims. Now in an area, in a period of time where we constantly hear about the size of our carbon footprint, where we talk about sustainability of our livestock systems, voluntary withdrawal of those claims, like I said earlier, is a little counterintuitive to me. In regard to the economics of the situation, there is a host of studies. Most of them are fairly similar in that they define or describe the benefit of growth promotants in regard to about a 3 to 4% improvement in efficiency. Now that when corn is $2 a bushel is big enough. When corn is $8 a bushel, it becomes quite significant. So there's two principles, and so again, where they become important to the practitioner, there's two principles under 209. Medically important antimicrobial drugs will be limited to uses that include veterinary oversight and consultation. Maybe that's a good thing for me, right? I'm a practitioner. That gives me more stuff to do. Most folks like me don't really want to spend all their time doing that, and find that evolution away from our current model of management a little offensive, but if you're willing to view that as an opportunity, maybe indeed it is. Right now you can walk into a farm store and pick up a bottle of tetracycline. You can pick up a tub of OTC boluses. That wouldn't be possible. Expanded role of veterinarians in oversight. Like I said, maybe an opportunity. I think we have a Dane or two here, actually. But I think much of Europe, the veterinarian now plays a more prominent role in this than before. But I don't know that it's been without some pain and transition. 213, I think, talks about implementation, right, Liz? But really just implementing the concepts in 209. So I don't know that I need to talk about that, other than to say what the government tells you and then how we get to that point is of real interest to me. So what happens to those folks who don't voluntarily withdraw their growth promoting claims, I don't know, but it'll be interesting to watch. The Veterinary Feed Directive. There's a lot of initiative going on in this area. Liz did a great job of talking about that. Marketing status change, I think, is, in my mind, at least in regard to what I do, a prominent part of that. So we've got very good representatives from our association involved in that debate. There is some draft text, I believe. I think Dr. Paul Ruin participated in that from the American Association of Swine Veterinarians angle. So something we're just watching for the moment. Everything we talk about, and was it FDA's use of judicious? Is that how that word came into vogue? I think it's a great word. I think it's something we all need to pay attention to. I think a little more simply than your average government official, possibly. But in my mind, judicious use of antibiotics just means using the right antibiotic at the right time, at the right concentration, with the correct amount of treatment time, with the correct amount of withdrawal time observed in follow-up to that, with the proper records completed and maintained. To me, it's that simple. Now, that doesn't really speak to feed efficiency and growth promoting claims, but in general, antibiotics, to me, we should use them judiciously. And to me, that means having a good, timely, accurate, herd health management plan. You know, if we look in our, if we look in our, on our hard drives, how many copies of herd health management plans will we find? Well, I was digging through mine looking for a copy of a talk I gave several years ago, and there's volumes. You know, we do this every day, and I think we're pretty good at it. We need that plan to be supported by current diagnostics. We need to demonstrate a valid veterinary client-patient relationship, and that's a little fuzzy, but we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. We do need to maintain accurate records for the appropriate amount of time, and appropriate amount of time, there's different versions of that, but if you keep them 2 years, I think you're safe. Some verbiage will say for 1 year after the pigs go to market, but 2 years in my mind. There's all kinds of programs built around judicious use. The We Care program, I believe, was a partnership between the Pork Checkoff, National Pork Board, and National Pork Producers Association, and did a very good job. Judicious Use is present in PQA Plus, Pork Quality Assurance Plus. That's been around for years. It's had multiple versions. Its current version is the Plus version. As veterinarians, we talk about judicious use under a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. We use that under the constraints of extra label drug use, and it's embedded into the Animal Medical Drug Use Clarification Act. Does anybody know Harry Snelson? I'm sure you all do, probably. Is Harry here? Oh, I can't tell this story. I get to hang out with Harry a lot now, or a little bit anyway, and as part of the executive board of ASV, and of course he escorts us to Washington every year. And Harry, I think, speaks, thinks, and sees in acronyms, and occasionally I have to say, Harry, stop, tell me what that means, and especially right before we go to Washington. Because he can fit a lot of letters into a sentence that don't necessarily form words, but he does a wonderful job at it, and he keeps us straight. So forgive my letters without sentences and words here, but I think most of us are familiar with most of them. There you go. Point proved. The We Care program, and this actually, I put this slide on here, and it came out of a conversation with the good Dr. Rolls. We have to deal more with animals. We have to deal not only with animals, but with people. If you look at the oath we took, if you look at the programs we serve, we have to be cognizant of public health. We have to produce safe food. And these programs help us maintain our focus on that. Produce safe food, protect and promote animal well-being, ensure and protect the public health. We're discovering a new vocabulary in veterinary medicine, I think largely a good one. I don't know if we're inventing it so much as maybe rediscovering it. This has become so important. The PQA Plus program is, I'm going to say, the premier program relied upon by retailers and wholesalers in food procurement and distribution. I think more than 90% of producers are on this now, and in fact, most producers are obligated to be on it by the company that harvests their product. The Hormels, the Tysons, the Swifts, the Cargills of the world. And embedded in that program, I'm sure you can all recite them all, but there's 10 good production practices. 7 of those 10 deal with antibiotics and medication. The herd health management plan, appropriate veterinary client-patient relationship, responsible use of antibiotics, ID, track, and maintain medication and treatment records. And this book, we don't have to create this stuff. This book is just loaded with examples of good record-keeping ideas. Most of what we have in the industry probably has roots in that. I Obviously, we need to adhere to withdrawal times, properly store, label, and account for all drugs, use proper administration techniques, etc. And then there's 8 through 10. But 1 through 7, this becomes so important that 1 through 7 we dedicate to antibiotic use and administration and tracking. So all these things, I've mentioned VCPR and almost all these things, a veterinary client-patient relationship. And under the codified Code of Federal Regulation, Chapter 21, Part 30, the 3 tenets of a VCPR are the veterinarian assumes responsibility for making medical judgments. The vet has sufficient knowledge of the animals in question, and the vet is readily available for follow-up. So it doesn't say how often you have to be on a farm. It doesn't say how many visits you have to make or what you have to do while you're there. But in my mind, a VCPR is very important and probably shouldn't be accomplished from an office 3 states away. It really governs non-OTC swine labeled products requiring a prescription, and then certainly the non-swine labeled products used under extra label drug use. Now, I don't know how long it's going to be before we don't have OTC products, but it looks like we're heading that direction. There's a lot of products that we use today that aren't labeled for swine. And that's for a multitude of reasons. It's really, really expensive to get those claims. Often they're labeled for a similar reason in a different species. Oxytocin is a good example. You know, oxytocin's not labeled for swine. It's been around forever. It's one of the very core products we use, and it's not labeled for swine. But under extra labeled drug use tenets of use, extra labeled drug use is permitted only by or under the supervision of a veterinarian. Extra labeled drug use is allowed only for FDA approved animal and human drugs. That becomes important. I had reason to research that a little bit a couple years ago, and there are a few things that we use that are not FDA approved, and so we've sorted some of those out. We need to have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. Extra label drug use is for therapeutic purposes only. Rules apply to dosage form drugs and drugs administered in water. But extra label drug use in feed is prohibited. We don't get to do that one. We don't get to change the rules when it comes to feed additives. Extra label drug use is not permitted if it results in a violative residue or any residue which may present a risk to public health. That one seems easy enough. There is an FDA prohibition of specific extra label drug use, and that precludes such use. There's a list of compounds that we just can't use. AMDUCA, it's actually the Animal Medical Drug Use Clarification Act, I think of 1994, that talks about extra label drug use. And there's a very, very good algorithm on the AVMA website that helps us determine what we should and shouldn't do, what we can and what we can't get away with. It essentially becomes a flow chart. And there's a lot of record keeping that is mandatory under AMDUCA. Identification of the animals, either as individuals or as a group. We can keep track of animals by pen. We need to keep records on the species treated, number of animals treated, condition being treated or conditions, the established name of the drug and the active ingredient, the dosage prescribed or used, duration of treatment, specified withdrawal, withholding or discard times, if applicable, for meat, milk, eggs, or other animal-derived food. We need to keep records for 2 years. The FDA may have access to other records to estimate risk to public health. Now, there's some ongoing effort in that regard. When we met with FDA this summer, I think they're changing some of their methodologies and some of their assays in regard to looking at withdrawal. Penicillin is one of those where the assay has just changed. Looks like it might be more sensitive. When you look at AMDUCA label requirements, the name and address of the prescribing veterinarian needs to be on there. Again, established name of the drug. Any specified directions for use, including the class and species or identification of the animal or herd, flock, pen, lot, or other group, dosage frequency, route of administration, duration of therapy. Any cautionary statements, your specified withdrawal, withholding, or discard time. This becomes important, especially if you get inspected by the FDA. I mentioned that I got drug into this by one of my clients. Well, they kind of got drug into it too. I had a very good client that underwent an FDA inspection. And the reason for the inspection, so a guy in a black helicopter lands on your front yard, walks to your door, and hands you a Form 482. And Form 482 defines the reason for the inspection. To my knowledge, this was the only FDA inspection that's ever occurred, to my knowledge, due to a preemptive residue avoidance concern. In essence, somebody had reported that there was a product on that farm that might cause a residue, and that caused this inspection. So that's how little it took. Now, as it turns out, that product was not on this farm. That actually was, I think the original complaint was for blue coat, and there was no blue coat on this farm. But that's how simple it can be to initiate an FDA inspection. They are great ways to test your knowledge and skill in the areas of prescription and record keeping. Of course, my client called me immediately, and I spent the next 2 days on the phone and in visitation with the gentleman who was very professional, very polite, incredibly thorough, and had a fairly limited sense of humor. Like I said earlier, they can be initiated for very little notice, or not much in my mind, not much in the way of a reason. The very, very first thing they asked for was a demonstration of a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. And I thought up to that point, that was just something that we talked about in presentations. Well, I guess it's not. That's a very, I think I had to send him several herd letters and visit schedules, and it wasn't hard to prove, but it was necessary to prove it. I mentioned that gentleman was thorough. He was. He spent the better part of 2 days looking in every corner of that farm, every cupboard, every closet. He looked at every single label. He looked at every single expiration date. He did his job very, very well. There was one product where the label had fallen off, but he could see where the glue had been that held the label on there. So we talked through that and the need for better labeling and that sort of thing. He was a pretty decent human being about it, but I'm trying to impress upon you the detail this guy went to. He asked a lot of questions, and like I said, he was very pleasant, very professional. It became incumbent upon me early in the inspection that maybe I shouldn't provide him any more information than he asked for. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. He was a really easy guy to get along with, but it also became apparent to me that if you don't break the rules, you've got nothing to be afraid of. As a practitioner, I think of myself as a solutions provider. I like to solve people's problems, right? And clients once in a while will ask you to stretch a little bit. And it's okay to stretch. That's how progress is made, right? But we better be careful not to stretch too far. And we better know which way the wind is blowing and which direction it's blowing from. Right now it appears to be blowing at FDA, and I think the level of intensity is increasing. So know which way the wind's blowing, know what you can and can't do. We all know there are some things that we should just never do. In Washington, we talk about political Darwinism. I don't even know what that means. But this, to me, points to Darwinism at its finest, right here. These guys will be limited in the population. Their genetics won't be passed on very far. Because you never know when something might blow up in your face. So I'm probably done. We've got some time. You know, this also has come to me recently. I'm going to take one more minute. And it's not necessarily germane to the rest of the presentation, but in the last couple of years, the veterinarian's oath has changed, and that became a little bit contentious. I think the oath is something as a veterinarian that we all think of as somewhat sacred ground. The oath came out of the AVMA House of Delegates in 1954. It has been revised a time or two, but the one I took was being admitted to the profession of veterinary medicine. I solemnly swear to use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society through the protection of animal health, the relief of animal suffering, the conservation of livestock resources, the promotion of public health, and the advancement of medical knowledge. Well, that changed a little bit, not a lot, but it actually changed due to an action by the AVMA Executive Board in late 2010. I've highlighted the changes in red. Being admitted to the profession of veterinary medicine, I solemnly swear to use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society through the protection of animal health and welfare, the prevention and relief of animal suffering, and the conservation of animal resources. Now, I don't have big problems with the changes. I mentioned it got a little contentious, and it did. I personally, just due to the nature of what I do, would prefer to have livestock still represented verbatim in there. It's not, but we talk about animal resources. I'm okay with that. We talk about antibiotic use. And what we don't talk maybe about quite enough, in my mind, we talk about welfare. And in my mind, antibiotics are an excellent tool and become important in the debate over animal welfare. And to really grasp that, you only have to be in a hot hemolytic E. coli case once or an APP case once to really understand that.